Alaikum. Wallahi wa Barakaatuhu. Let's shake the law back once again with another writing, another side poem, praise poem, prayer, litany, various ways to describe that Arabic word. But another Qassida by Cheikh Bamba, Qadima Rasul. This one is entitled Allahu min Kulli Kareemin Akramu. That just means Allah or God, just in case any non-Muslim is watching. We'll try to be Unitarian and universal with the descriptions, but Allahu min kulli Kareemin Akramu is a poem he wrote that means God is more generous than any generous one. Alhamdulillah, all praises due to God for that. But before we dive into it, while the presentation is loading up in the background, I always keep a writing from Bamba on deck ready for opening up. It's customary to recite a prayer from Bamba or recite a prayer from the Quran, verses from the Quran to set the tone before going into an Islamic study. If you have experience sitting with some brothers in a Sufi order, you'll notice these things. So we start off with, let's do Bihaki Wajika Kareemin, only because the Qassida that we'll be studying is Allahu min kulli Kareemin. Allah or God is more generous than any generous one. So the prayer we'll open up with is Bihaki Wajikal Karimi, or by the truth of your generous face, by the truth of your generous existence. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإني أعوذها بك وذريتها من الشيطان الرجيم ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشيطان وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وبارك. طيب تحفيظ كل من حفظها من الوداع بفضل الله تعالى، فهي سقط فين بقي على تنا بحفظها لوجه الله تعالى. بحق وجهك الكريم يا حفيظ واجي إلى غير إلى الغالي. بحق وجهك الكريم يا حفيظ واجي إلى غير إلى الغليظ إلى سوى حزبي واجه الوباء يا من سفى أعداء من لي وهبا لوجهك الكريم لا توجها لي دررا لي منايا واجها حتى تعني عيوبي يا معانا يا من منايا لي بعمني جامها يا قيل لي الوباء الله ولا إله إلا الله ظلمي مع فعبد المظلم عبدا يخيرني من ظلموا فجعلني الباقي بأنفع سرور خير سلام هي الهادي البشير سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Should have Jeff Sittering Tuba, Barke Sittering Tuba. Thank you to Sittering Tuba, the holy man of Tuba, Cheikh Bamba, Khadima Rasul. As-Salaamu Alaykum wa Rahmatullah. We got this thing pulled up. Let's add it onto the stage here. I make myself a little smaller. And here we are at the very top. I love that type of ornamental and symmetrical calligraphy in Arabic, but that's kind of an ornate way of writing the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, or in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Right below in Arabic is just the same thing what it says below in English. Allah / God is more generous than all or any generous ones. The Qassida praise poem litany written by Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, and it is pulling from or based off of the name of Allah from one of the 99 called Al-Kareem, or is the way it's pronounced in the poem here, Al-Kareemu, the one who is the most generous. So what's the Qassida about, Sheikh? Sheikh Jalo, what's the Qassida about? Let's make this full screen on my end, and here we go. Allahu min kulli Kareemin is a 3-line, 6-stanza acrostic poem by the illustrious Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. And we say 3-line, 6 acrostic because the line with the red letters at the beginning and the line with the black letters at the beginning go together. The 2 green lines go together, and the 2 purple lines go together, but they're broken up, split down the middle individually. So 3-line, which we break down in the way it's written like this, would be 6 stanza, an acrostic poem by Bamba. As you can obviously see, this one's a little bit more color coded than the last one that we did. However, before we can really get to all of the different colored words, there is a key that's shown at the beginning with the colors of the key pointing to the lines in each of the stanzas for us to remember to search for while we study and break down the acrostic or reading the poem. We'll see with this one how he also uses the color-coded words and phrases as a teaching tool to, sorry for the misspell, it's supposed to be prompt. P and the M got flipped, but to prompt the seeker to dive deeper into this acrostic, into the poem, when they realize that there are multiple color-coded layers of similarities to compare and study, along with the letters at the beginning of each line that will eventually line up with something else that we'll see a little bit further on. But those that don't know, an acrostic is a poem word puzzle, so to speak, where the first, the last, or other letters of each line spell out a word, a name, or phrase when put together and read vertically. And in this case, we shake out the Bamba. It's the letters at the beginning of every odd numbered line. We got your arm floaters on because we're going to dive right on in. But before, let's give a quick recitation of that guy. Allahu min kulli Kareemin, Akramu. Just so we can see the Arabic background screen. Bismillah, Rahman, Rahim, top line. Alif, Lam, Mim. Inna ma'asadilu, fala tujadilu. The second line from the top. Go. Allahu min kulli Kareemin, Akramu. من أحمر خدا له تكرم الله من كل كريم أكرم من أحمر خدا له تكرم تسليم له كل رحمن ولازم الإحسان للرحمن واجهه بالشكر بالله كفراني تكفى حسابه مع النيران اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وسلم. So it's a quick one, short one. This is the shortest Qassida from Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba that I've found, and that makes it easy to memorize, right? Alhamdulillah. So to bust it open here, but we said first line, second line. We're looking at the top is the second line. In Arabic, that's called a miftat. A miftat just means a key. So what we have is Alif, Lam, Mim in the red letters. The line going straight up and down by itself is an Alif or A. The line coming straight up and down with a little curve at the end is a Lam or L. And the letter that kind of looks like a sideways triangle with a tail on it is a Mim or a M. The Innamasabilu are in green, and the Wala Tujadilu are in that bluish purple color towards the end there. So I think that makes sense for y'all. Miftat in Arabic means key in English, like secret key, code. So the second line from the top is a key to a lock or secret that Sheikh Bamba hid in this Qassida or praise poem or prayer. We'll explain it briefly here, and its depth will reveal itself towards the end of the writing. Islam is mathematics, and mathematics is Islam. I have to throw that out before we explain this. But if we were to divide the Quran into thirds by the number of pages in that third division and the number of words between those page divisions, called the Hizb in Arabic, leaving out the Al-Fatiha, don't get mad because they look at Fatiha as an opener to the Quran. It's still a part of it, but that's why the Fatiha is left out for this particular mathematical thing that Bamba's doing. So we leave off the Fatiha or the opener at the beginning, and we divide the Quran into equal divisions of if we go to the beginning of first third division, we would see the red letters, Alif, Lam, Mim, at the beginning of the first third. We would see the green letters, Mimmakaa-idi, at the beginning of the second third division, and the purple letters, Wala-tu-jadilu, at the beginning of the final third division. Good Lord, Bamba. So that Alif, Lam, Mim, and red, they kind of have occult and hidden meanings. We'll go into maybe 2 or 3 of them toward the end. But that Alif, Lam, Mim is at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran. That's the first third division's beginning. So in the Masabilu in green, which means there is the only way. So whatever this Alif Lam Mim means, there it is. There is the only way. There is the only level of understanding needed. That comes from Surah At-Tawbah. That's chapter 9, verse 93, which is the second third. And the Wa La Tujadilu in purple and do not dispute is what that means, comes from Surah Al-Ankabut. That's chapter 29, verse 46. And that's the very beginning of the last third division of the Quran, when dividing the book into each thirds, leaving off the Fatiha or the opener at the beginning to wind up with Alif Lam Mim at the first third, Inna Mahasadilu at the beginning of the second third, and Wala Tujadilu at the beginning of the final third. So what he does with those, we'll get to. That very, very first line from that recitation we just went over, Allahu min kulli Kareemin Akramu, that means Allah or God is more generous than all generous ones, right? That's pretty self-explanatory, right? Allahu, that breaks down to mean God is, or God just He, or God He is, depending on context in Arabic grammar. Also in Arabic grammar, that word mean that comes after it is it's a pretty versatile particle. It got a lot of meanings and functions, but most common meaning of mean is from or of, like indicating an origin, source, movement from a point, or when used as a partitive, mean refers to a portion or a part of a whole. It's used to express some or a few from a larger group, or in this case, one from a larger group. That is bring about someone, a being. Right? In Arabic, that third word, kulli, generally means every, all, whole, and it's a word used to indicate complete quantity or entirety. Like, for example, you might use it in phrases like kulli shay, which means everything, or kulli annas, meaning all people. And so the grammatical form of that word can change depending on accent mark. Kulu, kula, kuli, depending on its function in a sentence, but its root still has its base in every, all, or a whole, large group of something, some people, a large selection. Right? Kareemin, right, fourth word, Allahu min kulli Kareemin, in this context is meant to, I mean, noble or generous, kind of go together in that form that it appears as a kind of a double descriptive. to take the descriptive meaning of this triliteral root K-R-M, where we get Kareemin from, right, to a higher level than its base or its root would show. So the next word, Akramu, also has a triliteral root of K, R, and M from that same word, generous. Allah is Kareemin, Akramu, more generous than the generous ones. So it's done that way. Kareemin and Akramu are written differently, but they have the same root to distinguish the two, as one being more generous than the other, due to the word Akramu, meaning the most generous, compared to the Kareemin, the other noble, generous givers. So Akramu, the most generous, Kareemin, the noble, generous one. So that first line, what Bamba is saying, Allahu, Allah, He is, mean from or of, Kulli, every or all, Kareemin, noble, generous ones. But how was that so? Because he is Akramu, the most generous, or Allah, God, is separated from the noble, generous ones in hierarchy, because Allah or God is the most generous ones out of all of the other generous ones. The generous ones came from Allah, right? So of course Allah is the most generous. Just a little Arabic syntax to break down how and why Bamba writes the way he does. We notice the first word of this line is in red, right? And that key from the last page, Alif Lam Mim, right there at the beginning, is in red. So we'll remember that. We'll see it pop up towards the end. Line 2, which still connects to line 1 there. That's Allahu min kulli Kareemin Akramu. Next, Man Ammahum Fadallahu Takramu. Allah is the most generous of all generous ones, and whoever focuses on God will receive generous honor. I don't know, Bamba make it easy. That's still pretty straightforward, right? Like if you focus your mind on Allah, if you focus your mind on God and higher realities, no matter what's going on, your mind benefits from it. But if you focus your mind on worldly and material things that pass away, you'll never receive the fullness thereof, because with each passing day, it is a little less full. Allah is never a little less full. The world is always a little less full. So if you want to read or recite this when you see it, this word, what looks like man, it's actually man. So man here means who, and it's usually followed by a descriptive term that describes the who. Allah, who. So, but don't pronounce it like an English word, man, which has a long A. The Arabic word man has a shorter vowel sound, so the A in that particular word doesn't last as long as it would if you were to say man. So if you want to recite this particular one and you run across that word that looks like man in Arabic, just know to chop that A in half, man, right? And Ammahu. So like Ammahu literally means mother, but the Bamba works to the Arabic syntax depending on the accent marks and the context. The Aleph or the A, the meme, which is M, when it's doubled, that's why there's two M's in that word. And what would be a silent H at the end, like ummah, can mean a family or a community, which comes from mother. My family came from my mother, right? So now with the context of that first and second word being matched up, we see how it's translated to mean whoever or one from the community. Now, towards the end, Lahu, it don't seem like it fits, right? It means he obeyed him, but in order to obey a teaching, it had to be held in the heart and the mind of a person and kept there. The more the seeker meditates on those signs that are sent to him from Allah or from God, the more he receives from Allah or God, as Sheikh Bamba said in this line, and he continues to describe in the next ones. There's only like 4 more left. The triliteral root of this long word, Karumu is Krm again. And that same word, Kareem, meaning honor, generosity. And in this case, that ka at the beginning that you see is kind of like a carrier, bringing forth the word that's attached to it in understanding, which is karumu, implying that what or who is described at the beginning of the line is what or who will receive the generous honor, explained by that last word. So, like, to make it all make sense, what they say in the Nation of Islam, make it plain, minister. What Sheikh Bamba is saying here is man who, or man Ahmadou, who from the community or whoever, Allahu, obeys or thinks about, meditates on him, as him being Allah or God, al-taqarrumu, if you do so, al-taqarrumu will receive generous honor from God. So it's amazing to see how many different ways some of these three-letter or triliteral root words in Arabic can have variant accents added to them to produce seemingly different words. They're just describing the same root in various levels of hierarchy and varying degrees. I say it all the time, man. Sheikh Bamba is a literal and a poetic mastermind. Line 3 here, and we just hit the halfway mark, y'all. I told you it's one of the shortest Qasidas I've seen from Sheikh Bamba. He says, look, now it's green, letters and change. So remember, the second part of that key from the beginning was green, and it also began with that same letter. So it's another little short hint, but that's aslim lahu ulaka an imani, or submit your entire being to him in faith. Sometimes the shorter the parable, yeah, the deeper its depths are. Because this first word, aslim, is just one accent mark away from being spelled exactly as Islam. If you put the accent mark that's on the top of aslim and the accent mark that's on the bottom of the L to make it say li, and put it on top. Now that word says Islam just by changing two accent marks. But it's similar, and it's translated to mean submit in its triliteral root of SLM, like salam, by most of the Muslim world today. But I should have put that but in all caps. Word salam from SLM does not mean to submit to anything. Islam has its triliteral root of SLM, and SLM means peace. So Salam means to be of peace, literally. So let anyone tell you that it means to submit yourself to the will of Allah. Submitting yourself to the will of God is what a Muslim does, right? But that's not what it means to be a Muslim. That's not what a Muslim means. That's not what Islam means. It's a part of the process, submitting to your higher self and let your higher self take you to God. But that's not what it means. It ain't like a concrete definition, right? So just a little insider. That second word, lahu, right? That it means for him being Allah or him being God. We get be one of peace for him, be one of peace for God. But for the sake of the standard Islamic narrative, we'll leave the translation as it is, like submit your being to God, because it's understood that way in the standard narrative. But for those who know, y'all know, right? Ulaka, when taken literally, means all of you, like not in accordance with a specific number of people or number of anything, but with all of your entirety, like all of you, right? It's alluding to your thoughts and words and deeds and actions and inactions and charity, service, and etc. All of those things are vibrating at the same level of peace or salam, so that the ones who may benefit from it, from you exuding it, right, can also do so with that same peace. And hopefully they can go spread that peace to even more people. And those people can go spread more peace to even more people, so forth and so on. Imani. literally means about faith or about belief, but in context, the stanza can be taken to mean in faith or belief due to how it's structured to say what it says. It's advising us to do something and how to do it, not to do something about something without telling us what that something is. It says, submit your entire being to Him in faith, or be of peace for God with your entire being in faith, right? It says, submit your entire being to Him in faith, because submitting your entire being to Him in faith would require the faith to be explained, but it's telling you to do it in faith. That's something that you have within. That's your chain, that's your silsila, that's your connection to Allah, is the faith and belief that if you're going through something and you pray to God, that God's going to answer that prayer, right? So what we got with Sheikh Bamba in this line is simple: be one of peace for God with your entirety in your faith and belief. Try to be universal. So if you're a Christian and you're following Jesus and believe He's the Son of God, follow those teachings as best you can. Never going to tell you you're wrong for doing that. If you're a Muslim, follow the teachings of Muhammad as best you can, because he's going to take you to God. If you're a Buddhist, follow the teachings of Buddha as best as you can. It will lead you to liberation. You are a Hindu, follow the teachings of any manifestation of Brahma, because Brahma is just the supreme Godhead, and follow them as best as you can with your entirety. And whatever that faith and belief may be, it's a connection between you and God. So do it with your entirety. They say ain't no such thing as halfway crooks. I ain't gonna throw too much Wu-Tang in here in the middle of a Bamba Qassida, but we'll move on to line 4 here. Say the Muslims don't do anything about Christmas. What's up with this red and green? It's tough for a lot, but still green. So this line is connected to the second key that we saw at the beginning, but don't worry, we'll show them all together towards the end. We'll got a nice little bow on everything, make it make sense. But what we see here, line 4, is وَلَازِمِ الْإِحْسَانَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ, and remain conscious of the Beneficent One. This is for my G's. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba's path has 3 steps of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. It has 5 steps of the 5 pillars of Islam. And in Sufism or in Tasawwuf, you will find the 7 steps, or the 7 stations of the soul. Those 7 stations of the soul teaching is kind of comparable to what some may understand from the 7 chakras. You know, you vibrate different at each of those levels, but you vibrate higher the higher you go. The higher you vibrate, the higher you go, the higher you go, the closer you get to God. All right. The previous line had Aslim in it. Remember, because Aslim and Islam kind of the same. It's the form of the same letters that make up the word Islam. The last word in that last line was Imani. So what he just did with the last line and this line is put them first 3 degrees in there. I mean, those first 3 steps in there of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Lord, do not stay at the first step. Please strive for the third one, because there's more of the path to go after learning the Islamic basics. We continue. So, walazimi, it literally means it's necessary to, but you got to read what Bamba does with the context. You kind of have to read the whole line to get the context, but then go back to the word you're trying to pull out, define, and break down, and use the context to do so. It's like another level of acrostic. You have to sitting to Bridget. Bamba Digij. Check out the new Bamba. Thank you. Bamba is an ocean. I don't think anybody's ever found the bottom of it, but why lazy means necessary too. But what he's doing here is advising of the necessity of something and exhorting us to remain in the state that he describes with the rest of the stanza. That's why I say it's kind of best to read the whole line first and then dive in to try to figure things out. Now we must have what's called ihsan to round out the first 3 steps of the path. of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, and to use the 5 steps from the exoteric and the esoteric side of the 5 pillars. Don't stay orthodox, it's deeper than that. Of the 5 pillars before traversing through Sufism and the 7 stations of the soul and the journey that it takes the seeker through. Now we get to see this word ihsan from the third step there. Ihsan, from the context of Quranic Arabic, means to do good, to do something beautifully, perfection, or excellence. However, esoterically, from a Sufi perspective, ihsan is taught to mean Allah or God consciousness. Like I know you've heard them terms from somebody before: God conscious, Christ conscious, Krishna conscious, Buddha conscious, or however they describe it, right? It's still that same etheric connection between you and a messenger that can take you to God. So that meaning God conscious in this sense from a Quranic verse, just so people don't want to say astaghfirullah, brother, you're getting too deep with this. And the Quran says nothing about being God conscious. Yeah, yep. Wherever the ihsan, wherever the God conscious turns his face, there he will see the face of Allah. There he will see the face of God. It's in the book. And a person that has attained that level of ihsan, they see Allah, or they see God in everything, because they know that everything was created by God, from God, right? God used his light to create praiseworthy light. So what else truly exists but God? If God used God to create everything else that he wanted to create. Mm. Rahmani has a name or an attribute of Allah in it. Rahman, the beneficent one from Fatiha. Bismillah, Rahman, Rahim. So here the phrase Rahmani means to or of the most beneficent, depending on context, because that's the way Bamba writes poetry. It's too deep. Beneficence in this case is in its simplest form really just means the act of doing good or promoting the welfare of others, especially without asking for anything in return. It's often presented as a moral imperative for us, right, to act in the best interest towards others, even if it requires going above and beyond what's required, because one day you might need someone to do that for you. Hopefully there's someone that has that teaching in their heart and their mind. If they see you need a little help one day, they turn around and give it to you. And they don't ask you anything in return because somebody did them the same way. So what Sheikh Bamba is advising here is for us to always try to stay God conscious of that. Stay God conscious of the beneficence of God. He gave a whole bunch of something to somebody you might not even know has a whole bunch of that something, right? And when looking at these definitions of what that attribute means, hopefully we see that there's a degree to that name or that attribute that we can also exude. Nowhere near how God exudes the Rahman essence, nowhere near how God exudes being beneficent, because he's Al-Rahman, that means the most beneficent. But we can exude Rahma, beneficence, like it's a thing we can't exude, right? But we can never be Al-Rahman. We can never be the most beneficent one. That's a title attributed solely to God. But with beneficence in its definition there being really an action verb, it's describing a person doing something to or for someone else. I'm a person and you're a person, right? So if I do a good deed to you, another person, that's the same way, just in a lower vibration from how God has the power to do that on a mass scale, whereas I can only do it to the people around me. Purple lines. So that just means there's only 2 more left. Last key at the beginning, if we remember right, was in purple. What this one says here is Wajihu bi shukri bila kufrani, or worship him with thankfulness without being ungrateful. So, sorry if it's a little too rough, but like if a person is a true believer, right? The person truly knows God. They don't have to be reminded of that which they believe in and worship. One would hope. Know God. Hopefully, no one will have to tell you, "Hey, man, have you prayed today?" Don't need a reminder. But the world is full of distractions, y'all. And every now and then, even the best of us might need a reminder to reorient ourselves in a manner that's pleasing to Allah, in a manner that's pleasing to God. So what Bamba says here in regards to this, Wajhihi literally means face him with, but let's explain the Islamic context here. Because the word wajh means face, also means the same thing in Kemetic dialects, but that's another video. Uh, the word u, which can mean he or him, it advises us on where to direct our face. So the translation is written in context of us already understanding Salat or the Muslim prayer, which is why it says worship him with instead of face him with. Because when we're making prayer with our face already directed towards the east, we're already facing where the sun rises. So here, Bamba says, since you're already facing the east, how about just doing a little worship while you're there in alignment with it, right? Hold on, look at that. Shukri, it's an easy one. Shukr. Shukri means gratitude, like thankfulness, particularly towards Allah, but definitely for anybody else who does a good deed for you. Thank you. You're welcome. The Quran promises that increased gratitude leads to increased blessings, both in this life and the next, in multiple spots. But this shukr or this gratitude or this thankfulness is not supposed to be limited to any specific time, any specific situation, but it should be a constant part of a believer's life, or if you know God, it should be a constant part of the knower's life. Because true shukr or true gratitude or true thankfulness is demonstrated even in difficult circumstances by acknowledging Allah's wisdom. Sorry, we don't make the name of Allah plural. The wisdom of Allah and having faith in His plan. Ila kufrani. It literally means thankfulness, gratitude when connected to shukri, right? Gratitude or thankfulness. But bila kufrani means to do that without ingratitude or without being ungrateful. So shukri, bila kufrani means have gratitude, be thankful without being ingratitude, without having ingratitude, without being ungrateful. And we'll see an example of this with Ibrahim or Abraham, right? In Surah An-Nahl, or the chapter of B in the Quran. This is a reading from verses 120 and 121. Kind of gives us an example of what Bamba's writing here. Bismillah ar-Rahman rahim. It says, indeed, Ibrahim was a comprehensive leader, devoutly obedient to Allah, devoutly obedient to God, inclining towards the truth, and he was not of those who associate others or partners with Allah, God. He was grateful. He had shukr, right? Grateful, thankfulness. He was grateful for his favors. He, in this case, Allah, God, chose him and he guided him to the straight path, end quote. And here with this particular line, Sheikh Bamba is essentially telling us to do the same from an entire story about what Abraham went through in the chapter of the beat from verse 1 all the way up to this selection here in verse 120 and verse 121. If you study Sheikh Bamba's poem that don't have a Quran handy, shame, keep that book close by. Line 6, last line. Remember we say a 3-line, 6-stanza. So now we see this last purple line, last purplish bluish line. And you will be saved from the hellfire on the day of judgment. Don't be afraid. We'll explain that word. We ain't gonna leave it like that. Tukfa hisabahu, quote unquote, literally translates into his account is closed. But remember, we gotta have context to put everything together, even especially if we're going to take a piece out to try to explain it like this. And the last part, Ma'anirani, literally means with the fire. So from an esoteric Sufi perspective, describing this last line, it can be said that his account is closed, is alluding with this seeker being saved from dealing with what is described at the end of this stanza, at the end of this line, which is the fire or the hellfire. And you got to deal with it because his account is closed in regards to that, due to him governing himself in accordance with the previous teachings that get one closer to God and further away from hell. Sufi hikmah. Hikmah means wisdom, right? That word nirani, there's a lot of different words in Arabic that means hell or hellfire, and it's easier to translate some of them directly to that word hell or hellfire. But some of them, just like this word nirani, like its root is nur, which means light, and in context, that light comes from a fire. Most would just say, yeah, that fire is in hell. Well, let's explain that from a Sufi perspective. That fire is the ego. It is the lower self, way down there below the first chakra, below it, way below it. That ego, that nafs in Arabic, that lower self has been allowed to inflame itself and rise up through the channels unpurified. And when the ego is allowed to rise through the Kundalini channels and circuits unpurified, that is hell. That is the hellfire, because that ego is never going to tell you to do anything good. And the result of you never doing anything good is going to be you going through hell here on earth for doing bad things because the ego told you to do it. And had to insert that before the last bullet point. I don't mean to preach, but I just had to say that and have to say this in wrapping up on that Sufi perspective. Sufi don't yearn for heaven, nor is a Sufi afraid of hell and its little bitty fires, because the Sufi knows that they both are just another higher, or in hell's case, lower degree of a creation from the creator. There was a point in time when they did not exist, right? So when the Sufi is preparing to leave the body, he's not fearful that he'll go to hell, quote unquote hell. He's not scared of going to hell because he lived in such a way that protected him from it. He lived in such a way that protected him from his ego or his nafs being inflamed and allowing to rise up, and that acting out through his person instead of his nafs, his lower self, being successfully converted, taking the Shahada at the heart space and becoming Muslim. And that lower self is no longer a lower self at that point. It starts to become the higher self, right? So when the Sufi is preparing to leave the body, he ain't afraid of hell. He lived in a way that protected himself from it. And he isn't quite cheerful about being able to go live in heaven either. Sorry. The Sufi wants our soul or our spirit to attain divine union back with the source, back with Allah, back with God. Right? As the last slide said, God created from himself the things he wanted to create. God used his light to create praiseworthy light that was used to create other things in existence. So what else is all the other things but another degree or different manifestation of that same essence or energy? But in our case, it's just clothed in human form. So if we are made in his image, then call us by our name. Most intellects do not believe in God, but they fear us just the same. I'm sorry for the Wu-Tang earlier and the Erykah Badu at the end, but in closing, all right, thanks for the joining in the study. That last part in red, before we start to break things down with the last few minutes we got here, closing dua or prayer or evocation, salawat, which means a prayer on the Prophet. It says, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa sallam. And I know y'all wondering why is there a W after that S? Is that swali? There's a few different ways to distinguish the two different S's in Arabic. There's a seen and a sawd. The seen is pronounced by like partially closing your teeth and blowing air through the gaps in the teeth. Seen. But the sawd still sounds like an S, just a deep S. So sawd comes from a slight curvature of the tongue, and you blow the air over that curvature of the tongue, which adjusts its pitch before it even gets to the teeth. So the seen and the sawd, they both sound like S's, but like one's a bold, or sawd is a bold S, and the seen is a lowercase s. So if you ever see that in any transliteration, just know you say the SW as a harder S than you would the singular S in transliteration. Any questions about any of those, more than welcome to post them in the comments or find me online, social media, Motibo Bilal Jallo. But what that red says is, oh Allah, God, send prayers upon our praiseworthy master and send peace. And I break it down and define it like that, just try to stay Unitarian and universal, just in case anybody that might not be Muslim is watching this. They see Muhammad, might get scared, run away. But if they knew that Muhammad means one who is praiseworthy, they look at Jesus, peace be upon him, as one who is praiseworthy. So with it being a messianic title from back in the day, it's no hurt or harm for them applying the title that way. Just don't get the figures and the histories mixed up. I mean, lastly, and this might look like a lot, but I guarantee it makes the key at the beginning, which we see up at the very top above the photo of the holy city of Tuba. There's our Alif Lam Mim, Mimmakaa-idi, Wala Tujadilu. So we'll explain that again. Remember now, we were to divide the Quran into thirds by the number of pages and the number of words between those page divisions, leaving out the Fatiha because it's an opener of the book, right? So Allahu Akbar. That's left off at the beginning of each of those third divisions. With the first one, you're going to see those red letters up at the top. Alif, Lam, Mim, A, L, M. That's the beginning of the first third, which is the first verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. It's the second chapter of the Quran, first verse. Those green letters up in that snippet up at the very top, the Inna Hasabilu, those come from the beginning of the second, third division of the Quran, and that's Surah At-Tawbah. That's chapter 9, verse 93. And the purple letters, Wala Tujadilu, at the beginning of the final third, those come from Surah Al-Ankabut. It's chapter 29, verse 46. Now, I told you we'll give a few explanations of what people say this Alif Lam Mim means, but keeping it in context. Alif Lam Mim does indeed have occult and hidden meanings. If you ask a Muslim in the mosque what Alif Lam Mim means, they're just going to say the meaning of those is with Allah, and Allah knows best. They're not even going to try to decipher them because it's too deep, really. But there are some scholars and ulama, it's the Arabic word for scholars, who have said, I'm not saying this is what it means, but it has been said that the Alif Lam Mim is a code that means I, not me, but this is God speaking. I, God, or I, Allah, am the best of knowers. So if that's the way of understanding that Allah is the best of knowers, then I definitely want to align myself up under that fountain of knowledge, right? Some say that the Alif Lam Mim or the A means Allahu. The L is for La ilaha illallah, and the Mim or the M is for Muhammad Rasulullah, in red at the top from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 1. So its first letter, of course, is an A. It's Alif Lam Mim. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba used that exact same letter with that exact same accent in the beginning of the very first line, line 1, with Allahu being the first word because the Aleph or the A is accented the same way. Alif Lam Mim or Allahu, right? So he matched exactly the accent for the letter at the beginning of the first third division of the Quran and pulled the first word and first letter from it and used that as a key to use in the first and second line of this particular writer. The green letters at the top that read Inna there is the only way. So depending on what one may take this Alif Lam Mim to mean, Allahu la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. If you're a Muslim, there. That's the only way. Allah, God, la ilaha illallah. There is no other God but the one true God, Muhammad Rasulullah, and one who is praiseworthy or praised be the messenger of God, or Muhammad is the messenger of God if you want to be literal, right? There is the only way. That Innamaa Sabilu comes from Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 93. Islam is mathematics and mathematics is Islam. But it also has an aleph or an A at its beginning, right? Because it says Innamaa Sabilu, but you only get that Innamaa from putting an accent mark on the bottom of the A. So now that A says E. But what Bamba did in this line, he used that same letter still, but he didn't use the same format from the last line. He flips the accent mark from the top to not make the A or I sound or I vowel sound. He places it at the bottom of this one, but it's still an A. Accent's just in a different spots on the bottom, so it's flipped. Of Inama, giving this particular aleph for A an E sound instead of an I sound like the last line. Still same letter, just flipped. So whereas the previous code used the same inflection, this one used the same letter still from the second, third, or the second, third division of the Quran, but changed the inflection. And lastly, the purple letters at the top that read Wala Tujadilu, which we have right up under this paragraph, and do not dispute. That's what Wala Tujadilu means. So if we'll take that, they'll say Alif Lam Mim Innama Asabilu Wala Tujadilu. Based on how we broke it down here, was to say that is Allahu la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah Innama Asabilu. There is the only way. There is God and there is a messenger from God. There is the only way. Follow that messenger and that messenger will take you to God. There is the only way. And don't and don't dispute it. I have to laugh because I don't want to make it seem like I was being rude with the descriptions here, but it's a third division from the Quran that and do not dispute just so happens to be at the beginning of the final third of the divisions of the Quran. If you were to take the whole book without the opener and divide it into thirds, equal parts. Mastermind, man. Previous Qassidas or the previous poems that we used here were kind of the same, but this one had another level. This one had a key that we had to use to find Quran verses that these verses come from, and figure out how he got the letters from the Quran verses to line up with the letters he used in the poem. It's like two different levels of acrostics used in this one here. So Al-Ankabut, chapter 29, verse 46, begins with a wow. So W or a U. That's where we get it from in English because the W in Arabic can actually be W or a U. That's why we call it a double U. The previous poems all had an acrostic that matched the title of the poem. All of the other ones we did before matched the title of the poem. But this particular one, and it's the shortest one, it used a key with the Quran verses whose beginning letter and essence was used in each line, adding another layer to how the acrostic can be done by using the Quran acrostically and taking the letters from the Quran's acrostics, breaking it into thirds, and using those same letters in thirds in a 3-line 6-stanza poem. I ain't found nobody else that can write like this, man, y'all. This is probably one of the shortest poems by Bamba that I know, but it encompasses Tawheed, divine oneness, Unitarianism, unity, divine unity, and it gives a hint at how mathematically composed the Quran is, also how mathematically composed Bamba's writings are. Looking at the 3 equal parts of the divisions, we can see that the sum of this Qassida or this poem represents the 3 different sections of the Quran times 20, or in this case, 20 times 3 equaling 60. And using that formula to divide the Quran, and using the first letter of the first word at each of those divisions to begin each line with this 3-line poem based off of a division of the Quran into thirds. So that's why this is the shortest poem that he wrote, right? Because that was the math to bring it all together and put a bow on it. Because that dividing the Quran into thirds, we wound up with those verses, and there's individual letters at the beginning of those verses, and he uses those letters also in a 3-line poem. But if a person might not have had the Quran handy or might not have remembered these Alif Lam Mim, Innama Hasabilu, La Tujadilu, and not knowing that they were Quran verses, they might have just been reciting this thing and not knowing how deep it is and knowing it has to be studied. I'm not saying my translations are perfect. There's probably always somebody out there that's a better reader, better reciter, has a little bit more Arabic than the person who thinks they have Arabic. However, it's just a hopeful inspiration that if you can read it slowly, even if you have to use transliteration with the Arabic as a study tool, to do so, because there'll be a point along that journey where you realize that you'll be able to read the Arabic slowly without using any transliteration. But taking everything you use to get to that point, you can also use to study the language deeper to see how its syntax works, how the words break apart and come back together. Or in this case, we can use the knowledge of that syntax to dive into how Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba wrote his poetry. And before we close on up, just to let y'all know, why the poetry is so deep, right? Poetry is so deep because during his time in history, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba had mastered the 13 different forms of Arabic prose and Arabic poetry that was out at the time, right? So Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba mastered 13 different forms of Arabic prose and poetry. And what did he do? He synthesized all of them into a 14th one that at that point in time in history, the Arabs didn't have. Alhamdulillah. He wrote over a ton of writing, so maybe one day we'll bump into one of those. It might be a little longer than an hour video, but Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. As-Salaamu, Alaykum, Rahmatullaahi, Barakaatuhu. Until we meet again, the next video will be coming in about 2 or 3 days. Alhamdulillah.